Yeah, well, listen, the tide is turning in Ukraine, everybody. You know why? Because guess who is on the case for advocating more U.S. weapons, for supporting Joe Biden's $61 billion request to prolong the Ukraine proxy war. There's a headline in CNN. Opinion: Congress must let Ukraine win, says Barbara Streisand, Sean Penn, Imagine Dragons, Timothy Snyder,
Oh my God.
and other luminaries. Opinion by more than 35 activists, artists, scholars, and others. So don't worry, everybody. Ukraine is going to bounce back because they have Barbara Streisand, Timothy Snyder, Sean Penn, and Imagine Dragons on their side. Imagine Dragons is a band, I think.
Yeah. Where are the luminaries, by the way?
Yeah.
It should say just and luminaries.
Yeah. I mean, what's there to say about Ukraine at this point? Yeah, Zelensky recently lowered the age of conscription to 25 under heavy pressure. He has to do that because there's just no one who wants to fight anymore. So now he has to lower the age for which people are going to be forced off to go die. Kurt Campbell, who's a senior State Department official, he recently let it slip that, Anthony Blinken loves to say that Russia has been weakened, that Russia has been depleted militarily. His deputy, Kurt Campbell, at the State Department admitted one day later, after Blinken said that that's a complete lie.
That clearly into view, Richard, as the conflict in Ukraine. I think we have assessed over the course of the last couple of months that Russia has almost completely reconstituted militarily. And after the initial setback.
So if that was hard to hear, he says that we have assessed that Russia is almost completely reconstituted militarily. Well, meanwhile, Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden are saying that Russia's lost. They've been weakened. He's saying that Russia's military is almost completely reconstituted. So even from the narrow point of view that sees Ukrainians as cannon fodder, which is the U.S. outlook, even accepting that view that Ukraine can just be used to weaken Russia, even that strategic goal has been a complete failure for the U.S.
I mean, that's not just anybody acknowledging it. It's Victoria Nuland's replacement, or the person who superseded her.
Yeah. I'll play one more clip. This is David Cameron, though. He still insists, though, that actually Russia is losing and that it's okay to use Ukrainians as cannon fodder. He pretty much says it out loud.
That it is extremely good value for money for the United States and for others, perhaps for about 5 or 10% of your defense budget. Almost half of Russia's pre-war military equipment has been destroyed without the loss of a single American life. This is
even if that's true, that half of Russia's pre-military equipment has been destroyed, which I don't know where he gets that from. I assume it's false, but let's say it's true. Well, they've replaced it with more modern equipment because Russia's military production has obviously met its goals and has been really efficient. I mean, no one denies that now. So yeah, if their pre-invasion equipment was destroyed, they've replaced it with more modern equipment, and that's why Kurt Campbell just said that Russia is almost completely reconstituted militarily. And then he says without the loss of a single American life. Well, how many Ukrainian lives have been lost for a goal of weakening Russia, which hasn't even succeeded?
American life. This is an investment in United States security. So that's what I would say on the issue of.
So there you go. He's admitting that Ukrainians are expendable for the goal of bleeding Russia, which, by the way, as Kurt Campbell admitted, hasn't even succeeded. So that's where we're at.
Well, on the Aaron, let me just highlight something you tweeted, which is just an update on the achievements of Ukraine proxy warriors. This is a Washington Post headline. With no way out of a worsening war, Zelensky's options look bad or worse. I think I saw this on the cover. This was on the front page of the Washington Post. This was something that was inevitable from the beginning. What's your take on Zelensky's options?
I don't know, Miami or I don't know, Israel. I know his family actually owns property in Israel, and he, after October 7th, he was so determined to express support for Israel, he wanted to fly there to show his solidarity. But the Israeli government turned that down. So I don't know. In terms of Zelensky's options, I think it's Miami or it's Tel Aviv.
Well, he wanted their weapons, and Israel didn't want to take a public position against Russia for obvious reasons. Syria, big Russian population in Israel, etc. But the weapons didn't come. They're not. And I don't know how many weapons can you use, or Patriot batteries can you effectively use when your army, your manpower is so depleted, and you're having to lower the draft age, draft women. There are young women showing up in Ukrainian military graveyards. There just doesn't seem to be a lot there, which really emphasizes the sickness of David Cameron's comments, which is, well, we're making money off this and we're not dying.
Exactly. Yeah. And Ukraine, the whole Ukraine war is a good example of how, even in purported democracies, elected leaders ultimately don't have any power when it comes to these critical matters of war. So Zelensky was elected on a peace platform in Ukraine. Huge majority of the country votes for him. He gets over 70% of the vote. The only region that doesn't vote for him in the majority is Western Ukraine, which is the heartland of Ukrainian ultranationalism, the Banderites, people who support Stefan Bandera, who support neo-Nazi militias like the Azov Battalion. He has this huge mandate for peace. He does take some steps to implement it. But every time he does, the ultranationalists flex their muscle. They threaten to kill him. There's that famous line which we quote all the time from the head of Right Sector, who said that if Zelensky makes peace with the Russian-backed Eastern Ukrainians, he'll hang from a tree. He won't lose his popularity ratings. He'll lose his life. So threats like that make it impossible for Zelensky to do anything. Plus, in the U.S., you have the national security state, which also won't let him do much to implement the Minsk Accords. They are lobbying him against it. They impeached Donald Trump, who's the elected president in the U.S., when he tries to actually stop sending weapons to Ukraine. And while he's also talking about supporting the peace process there, of course, the charge was that he was doing all this to compel an investigation of Joe Biden and of the origins of Russiagate. But they won't let, and of course, and Trump also faces the pressure of being framed as a Russian asset. So Trump's elected, he can't do anything. Zelensky's elected, he can't do anything. Barack Obama, he didn't want to send weapons to Ukraine either, but everybody around him wanted to, including Victoria Nuland, Antony Blinken, and Joe Biden. And they maneuvered basically around Obama to undermine his own policy as well. So in all these countries, whether it's the US and Ukraine, it just shows when you go against the forces of war and militarism, doesn't, like, you're going to be undermined no matter what you actually want to do. And Zelensky's he's now look at him now. I mean, he's just, his own aides say he's delusional. There was that article in Time magazine late last year saying that he's out of touch, that he's not listening to reality. He signed a decree ruling out negotiations with Russia so long as Putin is in power. He's become a complete he's unhinged. And look at Macron too. Macron before France was trying to make some kind of deal with Russia, trying to give diplomacy a chance, or at least giving the appearance that he was. And now he's talking about sending troops into Ukraine, which of course I don't think he'll actually do. So in all these countries, no matter what your initial intentions are as an elected leader, the pro-war forces always win.
Yeah, and just look at what's happening on the battlefield. It's Russia's advancing. We don't know how far they're going to go, but they're advancing toward Chasiv Yar. And this is the town which on its own is sort of insignificant, but it's west of Bakhmut, which Russian forces already took. And it's the significance of Chasiv Yar is that it's on the high, it's at a high point. So it provides further opportunity for advances towards other areas. Konstantinivka, for example, which put other parts of the Donetsk Oblast at greater risk for Ukraine. The whole point of Bakhmut, its strategic significance was it was a transportation hub. And so you're cutting off transportation lines rearmament lines for the Ukrainian military as Russia continues its march through Donetsk. And I don't know what else Ukraine can do to retrench its positions after that. I don't know what the collective West can do, but the military disaster continues to play out before our eyes without that much coverage. I think since the fall of Avdiivka and Bakhmut, the Western media is kind of downplaying a lot of these continued losses. We just don't know how far the Russian military is going to go. Ukraine doesn't have any ability to do another counteroffensive. It's fighting a completely defensive war of survival. And the longer the West keeps pushing it, the more likely it is to be just kind of a rump state. And then the West will start moving towards Moldova and making that, its base of anti-Russian operations. Total disaster. I mean, this is a defeat on par with Vietnam, but we haven't seen how far the defeat will go.
The counteroffensive, which was so widely hyped, months of planning, a lot of money and equipment poured into that. It was such a failure that, listen to this from the New York Times. They're talking about the view from the Pentagon. At the Pentagon, some officials say they do not consider last summer's efforts to have been a counteroffensive at all. So the counteroffensive was such a failure that the Pentagon can't even call it a counteroffensive. That's how bad it was. I mean, it's horrible. And so given that that was like Ukraine's big shot, they put a lot of time, planning, money into it. How could possibly Ukraine do any better now that they've lost so many people and so much equipment? But yet, look, in Congress right now, it looks as if Mike Johnson, House Speaker, is going to cave and give Biden what he wants, another $61 billion to prolong the war. I'm not sure if that will have any immediate impact, but what it will do is put a lot of money into this Ukraine proxy war for years to come. So that goes towards funding, whoever's left to fight Russia or fight the authorities that Russia might help install in eastern Ukraine, that they'll be around for that. So we're looking at just like a long-term conflict, maybe on a lower scale, but still a war.
And a war within a potential next Trump administration between Trump and his people and the entrenched elements that want to keep this war going, because Trump is campaigning on ending it, which would make sense and would save Ukrainian lives, save Russian lives, and would save more humiliation for the empire. Just imagine a Russian march through Odessa. They're going to start. They could start bombing the bridges on the Dnieper River next. They could get to Transnistria. I mean, just imagine the potential humiliation for the U.S. on the horizon if it doesn't just end this and force negotiations.
There was a really alarmist piece in the Washington Post the other day. Inside Donald Trump's secret long shot plan to end the war in Ukraine, foreign policy experts and some Republicans warned pressuring Ukraine to cede land would reward Putin. So yeah, apparently this article claims, with actually no evidence whatsoever, it's based on hearsay of something some Trump associate said at some gathering. It's really, there's actually no evidence for it, but they say that Trump's plan is to, force the negotiation in which Ukraine does cede some territory to Russia, eastern Ukraine and Crimea. And they're saying what a disaster this would be for Ukraine and all that stuff. Even if you look at polls in Crimea, majority of the population wants to be a part of Russia. In the eastern Ukraine, I think it's a little bit more mixed, but you do have a base of support there for Russia. But regardless, if you don't like that outcome, then what you should have done is gotten Ukraine to agree to the Minsk Accord, to implement the Minsk Accords, which would have kept all of eastern Ukraine under Ukrainian sovereignty. But the problem is, and this isn't talked about enough, the ultranationalists in Ukraine and Zelensky, they didn't want that territory actually back. They actually didn't want it back, I don't think, because they knew that territory, the people there actually want ties with Russia, and they don't support the ultranationalists. So I think one of the reasons Minsk was sabotaged is because people like the right sector and Azov and all these powerful, they don't actually want to have these Ukrainians living in their own country. So they forced basically this hot war to happen. And if the U.S. didn't want this outcome where Ukraine might lose now more land to Russia, rather than fueling a proxy war there, as they've done since 2014, they could have pressured Ukraine to implement the Minsk Accords, which would have kept all of eastern Ukraine under Ukrainian jurisdiction. It just would have recognized the rights of Russophile Ukrainians there, which for ultranationalists was a non-starter.
Well, and if there's a second Trump administration, there's the Russiagate narrative has expended itself, and it won't be available as a weapon to criminalize diplomacy. I think Trump will be entering office with more ability to reinitiate some sort of diplomacy with Russia, maybe with a less buffoonish kind of summit with Putin, which walked right into the trap that was set for him. But it's going to have to be done at some point. And I mean, you just look at the way the Western media is selling this war, and you can just see the desperation and the tragedy of it for Ukrainians. I mean, this is Vogue magazine. Ukraine today, it's basically like children. I mean, these are like adolescents and a woman. They're promoting the war. They're promoting women in the war, fighting on the front lines, which, you know, this isn't saying women shouldn't be in the military or whatever. It's just that when you've depleted your manpower, you're increasingly resembling the German army in 1944, 1945, when Hitler was bringing young boys and old men into the ranks to prop up a zombie army. And now they're bringing young women and they're glamorizing it in Vogue. This is disgusting. Wow. There are hipsters in the army with kind of like MS-13 Nazi tattoos. That's nice. Weird vibes in Vogue. They look like dead young people.
Yeah, it's like it looks like a promotion for sending these young kids off to die. That's where
we're at.
Yeah.
That's where we're at right now on Madison Ave with the masters of PR, the marketers of this war. Is they're marketing young people dying in large numbers in a slaughterhouse to pay Victoria Nuland's salary. to keep Lloyd Austin's seat on Raytheon on Raytheon's board warm.
Yeah.
Sick. I mean, absolutely sick.